I will start with our slides. So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for Mountain Housing Council Speaker Series on this very snowy day. I like Teresa's background that we can see the snow falling. Thank you. This series is an opportunity to dive deeper into a variety of housing topics, like today's session on the housing continuum, to past topics on short-term rental ordinances and key housing terms. My name is Christina Kind. I am the coordinator for the Mountain Housing Council, which is a program of the Tahoe-Truckee Community Foundation, whose mission is to connect people and opportunities, generating resources to build a more caring, creative, and effective community. Many of you know us for our grant making and scholarship work. Our mission-based initiative work, in addition to the Mountain Housing Council, includes forest health and wildfire resilience through Forest Futures and family strengthening through the Community Collaborative. We are led by a visionary board of directors who are deeply engaged in the community. And I don't see any on the call with us today, but here is a slide showing who they are. Also joining me is my colleague, Allison Schwedner, who is the director of the Community Collaborative. Thank you, Allison. She will be joining and helping facilitate this meeting. The Mountain Housing Council brings together 29 diverse stakeholders, businesses, local governments, community groups, special districts, and housing advocates to take on the unique and pressing challenges of achievable local housing in the North Tahoe-Truckee region. The goal of the Mountain Housing Council is to tackle the unique and pressing challenges of housing in our region, including availability, variety, and affordability as identified in the North Tahoe-Truckee Regional Workforce Housing Needs Assessment and the Regional Housing Implementation Plan. As you can see in the slide, our region and scope are characterized by the same boundaries of the Tahoe-Truckee Unified School District, which includes the town of Truckee, the north and west shores of Lake Tahoe, and stretches westward to include Donner Summit and east to the California-Nevada state line. The goal for today is to give an overview of the housing continuum, discuss where there is need, opportunity, and challenges, as well as solutions. I'd like to remind you to keep your microphone on mute. Even though this format makes it easy to multitask, we encourage you to keep your cameras on and to be an active listener. The format for today's session will be about a 30-minute presentation, after which we will have time for questions. You can put questions in the chat box at any time. However, we will wait until the very end to address them. This meeting is being recorded in speaker view and can be reviewed after this session at mountainhousingcouncil.org. We recognize that there are many diverse opinions on today's topic regarding unhoused, sheltered, and supportive housing. As I mentioned, we welcome questions after the presentations and ask that you follow Speak Your Piece protocol, which was adopted by the Tahoe-Truckee Community Foundation. Would somebody be willing to volunteer to read the bullet points?
I will, Christina.
Thank you.
So pay attention, listen, be inclusive, don't gossip, show respect, be agreeable, apologize, give constructive criticism, and take responsibility.
Thank you, Jazmin. And if you do feel the need to make a comment instead of asking questions, we will be limiting comments to only 2 minutes. So I'd like to give you a quick overview on this speaker series before introducing our speakers today. This graphic might be familiar to you as it's been guiding our work for the past 6 years. The goal of MHC's Achievable Local Housing Framework is to catalyze local conversations and innovations to address a range of housing needs in our region. The spectrum of needs, as seen in this slide, ranges from those having no income up to upper middle income earners at 245% area median income. Since market forces and area median income change frequently, the upper limit of this bridge is tied to an annual housing needs assessment. Our latest assessment showed that those earning 245% area median income can still not afford market rate housing in our region. This bridge also shows the range of housing types available in a community. In this series, we're going to dive deeper into housing options and types, each important for different people at different times in their lives. This graphic shows a housing continuum, which just is a different way of looking at the bridge in the previous slide and the housing types needed and available in our community. The housing continuum is universally used by governments and community-based organizations as a framework to better understand the housing challenges and opportunities present in a community. You can Google housing continuum and find a plethora of information. We have adopted our thinking from the United Way of Halifax. The link is in the upper right-hand corner of this slide, and I will send these slides after our meeting today for you to review. What you see here is the continuum of housing types. This list is not meant to be exhaustive. The continuum is meant to illustrate a general understanding of the type of housing we need as a community. As you know, we have community members who have no housing, as seen on the left-hand side of this continuum, to community members who are able to purchase their own home at market rates. In between, there are a variety of housing types. This includes emergency shelters, which provides short-term shelter, transitional housing, which is temporary, government subsidized housing that fixes rents based on income and is typically for households earning 80% of area median income and lower, affordable rentals, and home ownership. Generally, the concept of affordable is when cost, which is either your monthly mortgage or rent and utilities, is no more than 30% of gross household income. This definition of affordable differs from the federal definition of affordable, which equates to households making up to 80% of area median income, as in the subsidized housing seen here. We won't spend time on this concept today, but we will in a later session. Our continuum illustrated here also doesn't show employee housing, which would be somewhere next to subsidized and affordable housing, and which we know in our region with seasonal employees, we have a lot of. So people can enter and exit and move across this continuum at any point in their lives, depending on life circumstances and preferences. For example, an individual might start unhoused, connect to services, and move into subsidized housing, establish savings, and then eventually purchase an affordable home. Or an individual may own a home, retire, and downsize to an affordable rental or a subsidized unit. There are many reasons people may move right or left along this continuum. We need enough of all of these different types of housing to be a vibrant community. When we don't have enough, we see housing instability and insecurity. In our community, we've seen people leave the region because they can't find housing on this continuum. In this speaker series, we're going to invite community leaders to dive deeper into the buckets of housing illustrated here along the housing continuum. Again, the list is not exhaustive, but meant to highlight the different types of housing and programs needed and available in our region. Today, we're going to focus attention here on unhoused, emergency shelter, and transitional housing. So it is my pleasure now to introduce you to our speakers. Cathie Foley has lived in Truckee since 1991. She deeply believes that the world is a better place when all humans receive access to human necessities, including love and support. In 2015, when a grassroots effort began in the community to create an emergency warming center, Cathie took the role of program coordinator. Since that time, she has grown with the mission and programs and is now the director of North Tahoe-Truckee Homeless Services. She's thankful to have a team of amazing humans working together to support our most vulnerable neighbors. Jazmin Breaux is a licensed clinical social worker with a long history of working in the field of health and human services. She has been a manager in the North Lake Tahoe region for several years, working simultaneously for Nevada and Placer County. She is passionate about helping people access the resources they need to lead healthy and successful lives. So thank you both so much for joining us, and I will kick it off to you.
Great. Thank you, Christina, and everybody that's here to learn a bit more today. In America and here in our community, we can see that homelessness has been rising rapidly around the United States, but more slowly over the years in the North Tahoe-Truckee region. And to find sustainable solutions to this crisis, we first need to understand different types of homelessness situations as well as sustainable solutions. So Jazmin and I are going to start with some definitions that'll help clarify that piece of the puzzle. Transitional homelessness is the most common type of homelessness and is usually the result of a major life change or catastrophic event, such as a loss of a job or a health condition, a divorce, wildfires, domestic abuse, or any personal crisis, which again, this isn't an exhaustive list. That leads people to an unhoused situation that typically will last for less than a year. Then we have chronic homelessness, which is probably the most visible type of homelessness, and it's used to describe individuals who've been unhoused for at least a year or have repeated episodes of a year or longer throughout their life, while they also struggle with a disabling condition such as a serious mental illness, substance use disorder, or physical disability. Typically, people experiencing chronic homelessness have a complex long-term health conditions, and once they become homeless, no matter what the reason was that they became unhoused, it's very hard for them to get back into housing. And then there's a newer term that we refer to as our hidden homeless, and these are most often families, youth, and young adults who find themselves unhoused but are able to temporarily live with other people, called couch surfing, or they have a car that they can live in. They may be able to live in a campground, although usually there will be no electricity, heat, or water. They often are still able to go to work, and the kids are still able to go to school, but they can't afford to pay for rent or other living expenses. And these neighbors are very hard to see and count as they don't engage in traditional services. And in our community, we have many people who fall into this category that aren't counted in the numbers when we're talking about services.
So the next definition, literally homeless. This is a definition that is used by HUD, and this guides our point in time count and access to a lot of services, shelters, rental assistance. And so literally homeless means that you are literally homeless. You're sleeping in a place not meant for human habitation, at a bus stop, campground, maybe in a trailer without utilities, or you're staying in an emergency shelter. And then we have at risk of homelessness, which would be that you have an eviction notice or you have a notice to leave the place where you are staying and you have 2 weeks to do it, and you don't have ample resources to be able to prevent homelessness from happening once that housing option ends. And then HUD defines fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence and unaccompanied youth. There's special criteria for those two categories because of their vulnerabilities. And so there's a little more flexibility in the criteria known as couch surfing for these two specific populations because they are at a higher vulnerability and have less resources. Next slide. So I want to talk about the definitions of shelter. So we'll be talking about emergency and transitional shelter. So historically and traditionally, emergency shelter is short term. It might be something that looks like a very large shelter that people line up to every day to get a bed, or maybe you'll be able to stay there for a couple of months, up to 6 months, but it's usually very low barrier and there's usually not a lot of structure. And then historically, someone would then move into transitional housing, which would have more structure. It'd be longer term. Usually there's program leases or agreements that someone signs. And it's really meant to bridge the gap between homelessness and housing and to support someone with developing those life skills needed to exit homelessness. So there's a lot of focus on job skills, on life skills, and kind of getting re-engaged with family for social supports. However, I do want to note that these two different types of shelters do look very different depending on the funding, the program design, the location of them. So you may have an emergency shelter that is 6 months and there is more structure, but it's funded through emergency shelter dollars. And so they can look interchangeable, but these are kind of the two main components of shelter that we're looking at for our community. Next slide. And then for our definitions of housing, these are another important notes to look at. So supportive housing is permanent housing. An individual has to apply, they have a lease, and they pay rent. However, these types of housing is usually housing first model, which means that recovery and abstinence is not a requirement of this program. So the idea is that you can transition someone from homelessness into housing and they will be more successful with supports in place, and they'll have the opportunity to then look at their recovery and look at their goals and work towards what's important to them versus the traditional model of someone having to kind of work their way up into housing and earn it through transitional housing and getting a job. And we recognize that that's not realistic for everyone, especially individuals experiencing chronic homelessness, where there's severe barriers and limitations that would prevent them from going through a traditional model like that. And so supportive housing can happen scattered site. So individual leases across an area where the case management goes to those sites, or it can be project based where we have all the units congregated in one property. And we have some examples of that in our community that we'll talk about in a little bit. And the other pathway to housing is rapid rehousing. So this would be indicated for someone that fits into that transitional homelessness. So they have a job, they require kind of a short-term subsidy. It might be rental assistance, it might be a help with a couple of first months, help with the first few months of rent, and maybe some short-term case management to help with increasing income, maybe getting a new job, maybe getting childcare. But the idea is that long-term supports aren't needed to sustain the housing. We stabilize the person, and then the person is able to go on living their life without these additional supports. Next slide. All right, Cathie, over to you.
Thank you. So a quick overview of the history of homelessness here in our region. I've been here over 30 years, and we've always had a certain number of unhoused individuals. And one thing over the last years of building services that we continue to hear is, there homeless people in our area. And so just to give a really brief overview, in 2012, there was a group of 4 churches that came together. We had about 15 people that we served on a fairly regular basis individually in different ways. And the Catholic Church over on East Street opened up their annex so that we were able to start serving meals on Tuesdays and Thursdays and offering a place for people to grab a shower and people to grab clothing. And that began in 2012. Project Manna also had an office on site. And so that continued through to 2015. In 2014, a group of individuals started talking about the fact that we knew people in this community that had passed away, that there were no options for emergency shelter. And we went through the process, and on December 24th of 2015, we were able to open the Emergency Warming Center for a pilot year. And that was and it still is, it's a weather triggered center. When we open, our triggers to open were 15 degrees or less, a foot or more of snow, or other severe weather conditions, along with having enough volunteers to open that day. That typically we started opening when those weather triggers hit in November through April. As we moved into 2016, Placer and Nevada County realized that there were individuals in our communities that needed support year-round, and Mental Health Service Act dollars were contributed so that we would have a homeless outreach person in this community, which was somebody that during the times the warming center wasn't open, during the times the food resource center wasn't open, they could go meet people where they were at, direct them to these services, and then help connect them with other services. So we went along in this fashion for the next few years, with noticing a little higher need each year. And when COVID hit in 2020, there was a huge explosion. The Food Resource Support Center closed. The places where our unhoused neighbors, be it the library or the cafeteria, at the hospital or Starbucks, all those places became closed. And so all of our unhoused neighbors had really no place to shelter in place. And so our team stepped up, and instead of closing for the season, with some key partners, we were able to come up with a short-term plan to open a day center where we were open 4 days a week, and we were able to help our unhoused neighbors face all the things we were facing when we were uncertain what was going to happen with COVID and our health, and give people a safe place to be, a safe place to take a shower. As 9 months passed really quickly and there was no resolution or end in sight to COVID, we were fortunate enough to be able to merge with AMI Housing, which stands for Advocates for the Mentally Ill Housing. It was an established nonprofit providing housing, employment, and life skill programs down in the Auburn area to both Placer and Nevada County. And they were willing to absorb the small warming center program, which was mostly volunteer-led, and created North Tahoe-Truckee Homeless Services. With that, it enabled us to be able to work with the continuum of care and qualify for some federal funding in order to build supports that our unhoused neighbors have needed for a long time, but that was really evident during the COVID time. And so at that point in time, the homeless outreach coordinator position moved from Sierra Community House. That person was a part of their team for a long period of time and just worked with us and became part of our team. And this is what's really enabled us to have the services we have in the community today. Where to you, Jazmin? Next slide.
Okay, so one mechanism that we have in place to understand the picture of homelessness in our region is the HUD point in time count. So this is a federal requirement that is required of each continuum of care. So both Placer and Nevada County each have a continuum of care, and then they fall under the Housing Resource Council of the Sierras under the umbrella of the governing body. And so this provides a snapshot of people experiencing homelessness on one given night. The night is designated by HUD, so we don't have any control over it. And the night happens in the winter, which is when our numbers are historically lower than in the summer when we have a larger transient population because the weather is nice. So you can see on this graph that our numbers have not fluctuated a lot over the past several years. However, what is interesting to note is while the numbers haven't changed, the number of people that we have housed in between each point in time count has been very substantial. So I'll have Cathie talk about this in a little bit. Christina, can you go back to the last slide? And so this is just one point that we have to share homelessness. This does not count those hidden homeless that Cathie was talking about earlier, the people that are couch surfing, the people that have enough resources to not be literally homeless. And so when we're talking about homelessness and housing in our community, we're really only focusing on the people that are literally homeless when we recognize that there is a lot more need with the housing instability across the region. Next slide.
And so in addition to the point in time count, our team and in this community, we get to know our unhoused neighbors by name. And there's a homeless management information system where we are trying to get to know individuals, know what they need, and then helping them to really end their homelessness. And a huge success with these supports in place has been able to end homelessness for 52 households last year. Well, over 18-month period of time, from July 2021 through December 2022. That's 58 individuals and 52 households that are no longer homeless. 29 of those were chronically homeless, and 27 of those were transitionally homeless, and many of them would also fall into the category of being hidden homelessness. You can see through the demographics that the majority of these neighbors have lived here for 10 years or longer. They're the fabric of our community. And 7 have been here 5 to 9 years, 17 have been here for a year to 4 years, and 8 individuals had been here less than a year. And so the way to end homelessness is through housing. And I'm just going to share a couple quick stories. We had a family that falls into the category of transitionally homeless and hidden homeless. And like so many other families, the Smith family of 3 lost their housing when their property owner sold it. And initially, for about 3 months, they were able to rely upon friends and family and couch surf, sometimes together, sometimes separately. And they became on the radar through the daughter's high school counselor. And she made the connection to our homeless outreach team, who was able to work with them to get them into transitional housing. In our area, the only option for transitional housing is a motel room. and support them over a couple months period of time, give them the stability of where they were going to sleep at night so they could continue to work, daughter could continue to go to school, and they could continue to work hand in hand with a case manager in order to take the steps needed to find housing. About 2.5 months later, they found housing through the help of rapid rehousing and some private funds. We were able to help them with that first month's rent, their deposit and their security deposit and their utility deposits. And they were able to stay in a community that they've been in for 15 years. Their daughter was able to finish high school. Another story of these 58 would be one of our chronically homeless neighbors. And Larry, after the Marines, he moved here to Tahoe and he worked in the service and ski industry like many of us moved here to do. And after living and working here for over 10 years, he found himself living outside, and he continued to live outside for another 10 years or so. Our outreach team continually tried to build relationship with him. And then last winter, all of a sudden, he decided that he was ready to talk about housing. And at that point in time, we were able to put him into a transitional housing situation and help him take the steps needed towards waiting for his apartment to be ready. And once his apartment was ready, he moved in and immediately he was able to quit smoking, which is something he tried to do over and over through the years. And he's been taking steps forward to regular healthcare appointments. And he continually mentions to his case manager how grateful he is to have what he calls his forever home. And so these are just two of the stories of why it's important to keep the fabric of our community complete and have that whole spectrum of housing for all the different neighbors. Next slide, please. So over the last couple of years, North Tahoe-Truckee Homeless Services has worked really hard to provide vital safety net services and end homelessness in the North Tahoe-Truckee region, one person at a time. And we really focus on using a low barrier, meaning that everyone is welcome, their pets are welcome with them. We come from a space of being very person-centered, which is paying attention to what the individual wants, what they think their next steps are, not what we might think they are, and then helping them take them. We're very aware that everybody who has been homeless, whether it's they're homeless for the first time ever and for one day, or they've been out there for 20 years, that there's trauma that they need to work through. So we're very aware that meeting people where they're at and being aware of that trauma helps us to develop the relationship. And then we work under the housing first approach with the belief that housing is a basic human right. Next slide, please. And we currently have 4 programs. We have the Weather Triggered Emergency Warming Center, which we'll go into a little more detail on the next slide. We have the Day Respite Center. We have Street Outreach, and I'll give a little more detail on that because we won't be talking more about that later, but our Street Outreach Coordinator reached 66 people last year. They meet them where they're at, whether that's someone's called and shared that they know of someone living in a car, or they meet them when they're out doing the rounds, trying to meet people potentially in places they'd be camping, or we receive a call from law enforcement or any concerned citizen that knows of somebody that they believe might need help accessing services. And so we have a team that's able to make that happen, to provide basic necessities, the goal of developing relationships, connecting them back to the services we do have, and helping them to take steps forward. We have case management and housing support, which has been vital to the ability to get anybody into housing. In past years, we've been grateful to be able to house 2 or 3 people, and that was, we had one person doing all the different roles, and there was very little housing in this area. So this year, through the case management, we were really able to help people with a lot of one-time items that are vital to individuals, like getting their ID or their social security card or a birth certificate, which are all needed for jobs and housing and other benefits. We were able to refer many people to access benefits, Medi-Cal, CalFresh, make doctor's appointments. And our long-term neighbors that are here and engaging for a long period of time most often want to move forward towards a housing plan. And housing plan can look different. Sometimes people want to engage in a full-time shelter, in which case we try to help find a place for them out of the area that offers that. People have reasons that transitional housing and supportive housing is needed immediately, and they don't want to wait for that to be created in our community. And so we work hard to develop relationships and connect people to whether it's Hospitality House or some of the transitional housing that AMI Housing has down in the Nevada County area. And we helped with 132 housing applications, which filling out housing applications is really a challenge, especially when you don't have a post office box, you don't have a phone most often, you don't have an email. And so we worked really hard to help people that had those barriers to complete applications last year. And these are the current 4 programs that we have. Next slide, please. So in our community, the Emergency Warming Center is in its 8th season. This would be an example of emergency shelter. It's only open on the most severe weather nights of the season. And this year, we've been averaging between 7 and 13 people each night. And as of February 1st, we've been open 46 nights, but as of last night, we were open 58 nights. And it's a record season for us, as the most nights we've ever been open an entire year has been 46 nights. We've had 56 different individuals. Some come just for dinner and be part of a community and connect to case management. Others are staying overnight. So we provided 244 overnight stays as of February 1st in this space. Next slide, please. The other program that is considered emergency shelter is the Day Respite Center, and it's open currently 3 days a week on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays from 1 in the afternoon until 5. People are able to get a warm meal, they're able to take a shower, to do laundry, connect to necessities, whether it's clothing, and to receive case management, and just a place that they're able to be. We have been open 93 days up to February 1st, and of the 198 individuals that have come through the program during that time, about a third of those are long-term neighbors who come back on a regular basis, just to access those basic necessities that I know myself I take for granted a lot of the time. Next slide, please.
All right, so I'm going to
I'll
talk
let Jazmin.
Thank you, Cathie. So I'll talk a little bit about transitional housing. So it's that bridge between homelessness and permanent housing. So Sierra Community House is our main transitional housing program in this region, specifically for victims and survivors of domestic violence. So they operate a small program in our community. And then we have Granite Wellness that operates a recovery residence, and that's located in Truckee. And so that's, again, a short-term place for people to be. You get a room in a house and to work on recovery and employment and long-term housing. And then we have the emergency room project as well, which was run through North Tahoe-Truckee Homeless Services. And so they were able to utilize long-term hotel stays for several months at a time, several winters ago, to help bridge that gap. Next slide. So supportive housing, we talked about this a little earlier, and I wanted to lay out the supportive housing that we do have in our community currently. So Brown Bear Studios, formerly known as the Seven Pines Motel, it's located in Kings Beach. It was purchased by Placer County several years ago with the use of the home key funding, and it's currently undergoing renovation. So we haven't opened it fully yet. It's still hopefully in the spring, and it will be 13 units of permanent supportive housing, and there will be an on-site property manager in addition to a case manager on site. And then we also have Coldstream Commons that's located in the town of Truckee, and it's a larger complex with 12 units dedicated to supportive housing. Those are called HUD 811 units. And so the requirement is that someone have a medical or a mental health disability, and it comes with nursing and social work supports. And then Pacific Crest Commons is another project in the works. It will be located at the old CHP site in Truckee. They haven't broke ground yet. They're still working on the tax credits, and it will be developed in partnership with the Regional Housing Authority. That will also be a larger complex of about 55 units with 10 units dedicated to supportive housing. Next slide. So housing alone cannot solve homelessness, even though it is the key to ending homelessness. We need a regional vision in this community. We've been working to develop programs and it's been working all right, but we really want community buy-in on the programming and supportive services moving forward. We want a new location for the day center and emergency warming center operations. We recognize that its current location at the Church of the Mountains is not ideal for a variety of reasons. The actual physical space is difficult to operate within from a staffing safety perspective, and it also impacts the local businesses and the other services that are around that area. And so we're really looking for strategic coordination. We will be standing up a homeless advisory committee that will be housed under the Housing Resource Council of the Sierras. So that's that's Placer and Nevada County Homeless Continuum of Cares. And so that will be a special committee that we will be standing up so that we can report out to the HERCS board. And the goal is to get our jurisdictional partners involved in that so that we can really decide together as a group what the vision is for this region and how to move forward. Next slide. The other piece that we need in addition to the regional vision is a sustained investment. So as Cathie mentioned earlier, we had a rapid expansion of services after COVID hit because of all the additional funding that we had. And what we've seen from that is that the investment in those services really have supported our community, and they outweigh the cost of keeping people off the streets and out of emergency departments and out of jails. When you look at the dollar amount of someone experiencing homelessness that frequently goes to jail in the emergency room and has interaction with law enforcement, it far outweighs the cost of a subsidized housing and case management, which really is not a lot of money compared to the overall cost. And it's the right thing to do from a human perspective. Next slide. So ways you can help. So North Tahoe-Truckee Homeless Services has volunteer opportunities for their sheltering, when they have their sheltering nights, and they also have donations for specific items that they are seeking out. So you can go to their website to get involved with any of those options. You can also contact Cathie Foley if you have any questions specifically about programming. And if you have an interest in becoming involved in the regional vision process, then you can contact me and we can talk more later. Thank you.
Thank you, Jazmin. Thank you, Cathie, for that really great overview. You guys are doing tremendous work in the community. And so now it's a portion of this event where we turn it over to you, our audience, our participants, to ask any questions. And you can ask them of Cathie, of Jazmin, and then I failed to introduce Teresa earlier. Teresa Crimmins is here on the call, and she is the Deputy Executive Director at Sierra Community House. So if you have a question about their transitional housing services, you can also direct that to Teresa. Oop, and I see there's a question in the chat box. Oh, no, Allison, thank you. So Allison put in the chat box, thanks for the thorough overview, Jazmin and Cathie. And so if you do have a question, you can use the chat box. Feel free to put it in the chat box, or as Sven just did, you can use the raise hand feature on Zoom, or if you'd like, you can turn your camera on and raise your hand and I'll be able to see it and call you. So Sven, please ask your question.
Cool. Hi, guys. First, thanks for setting this up, and thanks for being in the presentation. For those who don't know me, I am the general manager for the Truckee Recreation and Park District. And my question is, because I know that you guys said here that the current location at the church in Truckee isn't a great location. What role does zoning play, and is it a good or a bad factor, if you will, in trying to find alternative locations? Because we had the history where we used Veterans Hall for a while, but because of zoning, that ended up losing its emergency designation. I don't know if it's a factor at the church, but in trying to find an acceptable long-term location, what role does zoning play?
Cathie, do you want
So
to?
I'll start on that one. So the zoning is definitely a challenge. We've spent a lot of time over the last few years looking for places that fit into the zoning, but that's really one piece of the puzzle. The other piece of the puzzle comes down to that regional vision that Jazmin is talking about, because even if we found a location over the last couple of years that was in the, I think it's general commercial zoning area, to have everybody on board for the financing for the long-term commitments through leases or purchases takes a much bigger picture than we have now. So we know that general commercial is really the zoning that is most appropriate, but it also comes down to the other businesses or lack of businesses around an area and being able to change that. So it is definitely one piece of the challenge, but I view the bigger challenge being just getting us all together and having that regional vision. And I believe if that is in place, then finding an appropriate location can happen. Jazmin, please add on to that.
I think you summed it up perfectly. I mean, there are limitations with finding a property that fits the zoning, that's, you know, close to a bus line, that's close to town. And so that is a logistical challenge. But like Cathie said, it is more about the regional and political will and the community buy-in to make something like this happen. And then going after federal funding and site location or site I'm forgetting the term, but you have to have site control in order to get some of these fundings. And so it's a little bit of a Tetris game of getting everything in line and then things falling into place in the right order.
Okay, and then I thank you for that, because I know in other conversations I've been asked if I think of any other places, but it's not just the location. I'll still offer them if I have an idea. The other question I had simply was, Cathie's statistics about 58 people in the last few years or whatever it was for services. Was that just Truckee, or was that Nevada County wide, or was that Eastern County, or what was that range? I think I may have joined the meeting a little late.
So that's the North Tahoe-Truckee region, which would be Truckee, Tahoe City, Kings Beach. So it spans Placer and Nevada County, as well as we have a tiny little portion of El Dorado County from the far west shore that can occasionally fall into that, as well as a little bit of Nevada when you're on the really edge of Kings Beach and Crystal Bay. But the 90% of it is, yes, Nevada and Placer County, North Tahoe-Truckee.
Okay, thanks again for the presentation.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have a question that they would like to ask? I know that was a lot of information. For some of you, it might be very new information, including just definitions of the different types of shelter and housing available. So again, we'll make this recording available after and the slides.
And if questions come out afterwards, which often happens for me, please reach out.
And again, if there's any interest in being a part of the advisory committee that Jazmin talked about in the final slide, her information is also on the slides, and we encourage you to reach out to Jazmin. Okay, well, I won't keep everyone here on the snowy day if there are no more questions. And again, as Cathie said, if you think of it later, feel free to drop me an email and I will direct it to the correct person. And thanks so much for spending your Friday with us, especially to Jazmin and Cathie for that great overview. So informative. Teresa, also thank you for joining, and have a great Friday and weekend.
Bye. Thank you, everybody. Have a
Thank
great
you.
weekend.